I kind of left a few days later, and when I got to Cairns and I posted a photo of me arriving, I literally held up this Dr. Seuss book, which was, oh, the places you'll go, and today is your day, you're off on your way, some sort of adventure-y kind of book, but I loved the philosophy of it. So the whole reason why my van adventure ended up taking shape was because of a chance encounter with a couple that told me some information I didn't know, because of a chance encounter with a mechanic that was actually able to fix the van, and yeah, and because of a Dr. Seuss book.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Different Boat, Same Storm. My name is Atharv, and today I have with me Andrew Riis. Andy, thank you so much for being with us here today. It's such a pleasure. I'm really excited to get to know you.
Yeah, man, I'm so happy you hit me up on Instagram and we've reconnected. Obviously, doing that Seth Godin program at Kimbo last year was amazing, and yeah, I'm really keen to see where this conversation goes.
Thank you so much. And now that you mentioned Akimbo, just to give you just to give everybody a context of how we met. As everything happened over the summer, everybody was at home, completely virtual, working in their own environments. And then I came across this program by Seth Godin, a leadership program by Kimbo, where they brought people from around the world to collaborate and work on creative projects and ship them in the span of 24 hours. And that's where I met Andy. So we've never actually met in real life. We've only ever interacted over Zoom in this fashion, which is very fitting for our times. And yet, despite that, I've heard so much from his stories, and I've learned so much from everything that he's done that I thought that we had to share this with our viewers. So, Andy, why don't you go ahead and give our viewers some context into everything that your life is? Because I know that there's so much.
Yeah, sure. Let's just go way back to the start. So I grew up in Canada till I was 11 when my family moved to Australia, and in Canada, I grew up on this. It was literally an 80-acre farm. So picture, we'd have a soccer field, and we'd mow the lawn with this massive ride-on lawn mower and let the grass go tall, and then kind of carve a maze through it. And we'd make our own ice rink every winter and all that kind of thing. So I grew up there. My mom is actually South African and my father's Danish. They met in Canada, fell in love, got married, blah, blah, blah. I was born. And then since kind of age 11, age 12, I've lived in Australia. Most of that time has been in Sydney. And I mean, we can get into whatever area you want to, but I definitely went through a very hard period from, the initial time I moved to Australia all the way through till when I finished high school, really. And I think that period was very formative for me. And now, man, like what lights me up the most is just, I mean, conversations with people, really doing stuff like this and connecting people. I think it's so easy nowadays. And I can say this because I've experienced it personally, to focus on individuality and to focus on ourselves, when what I really feel we as humans need right now is more community and more connection and more togetherness. And there's really something beautiful about helping one another from a selfless place, and from taking the time to see the world from a different perspective. And every time I do that, every time I maybe even just give a second, a second chance to someone I might have previously judged, and then just open up and have a conversation with them, or smile at a stranger on the street, or play ukulele on top of my van and see who I meet. All those moments are so beautiful and so fulfilling and so magical. And that's kind of what I want to fill the rest of my life with.
That is beautiful. That notion of just being more empathetic towards each another and giving out more love without any expectations of it bring coming back to you, because you derive joy from the act of giving selflessly,
Yes.
is something that I resonate with so much. And that's kind of what got us started on this podcast journey, because we felt like too often we desensitize and dehumanize our experiences in these times and even beyond the pandemic, because it's real people going through real problems and living very real lives. And only when we realize that we're not going through this in isolation, we're not just individuals living through this time and living through life in a vacuum, can we be more understanding and loving and caring.
Mm.
And that's what I hope to do in my life as well, to try and seek out those perspectives. And speaking of seeking out those perspectives, I know that you've been almost on a soul seeking journey that was all about seeking out those perspectives. And I'm very curious to know more about that.
Mm. Yeah, man. Well, let's definitely go in the van life direction. But I mean, before we even head there, I think we need to talk about how Hello Stranger started. And so, kind of
Mm.
in the early days of COVID, before it had really come to Australia, uh, I went to this dinner party with about 40 complete strangers.
Oh, wow.
And went to this dinner party. I rocked up and I loved it. And for a lot of those people there, it was the first time they'd ever been to something like that. And there were people from
Mm.
such a diverse kind of range of backgrounds and interests and hobbies and cultures and you name it. It was kind of there. And everyone was able to connect at a really deep level while still having this beautiful sense of like lightness and play. And I loved it. I loved it so much. And so basically the guy that hosted it, his name was Raj. I hit him up and said, "Hey man, I love the fact that you hosted this dinner party and I'd love to chat with you just about your life and, like what motivated the dinner party and like how did you think about it and how did your past experiences lead you to this point today?" I was just really curious. I wanted to have a conversation. And I said to him, how about we record it for the fun of it? Just why not? And so we got into that conversation. We talked. The audio quality was horrendous, literally. But I I was so lit up by that conversation and so lit up by connecting with someone without an agenda and seeing where the conversation went. And also so lit up by the power of listening. Like I think what a lot of podcasts and interviews do wrong is they treat people as fixed objects, like a chair. But the reality is, as human beings, we're a lot more fluid than that. We're not a fixed object. And so there's a certain way of listening which can surface things in people and allow this kind of fluidity in the conversation to emerge, at which point these kind of beautiful shared truths, I would say, are almost created and stories are just surfaced. And it's just magical, man. For me, it's a form of art, really.
Yeah.
And I got out of that conversation and I was like, wow, I love this. And long story short, I mean, I just hit up a few other random people. I hit up people that I went to university with and didn't even like and like hated and was like, hey, let's have a conversation. I in a social distancing way, walked up to strangers on the street and was like, hey, let's have a conversation. And basically within a 2-week period, I recorded about 18 conversations and they averaged
Oh.
probably about 90 minutes to 120 minutes. Some days I would do 3 or 4 a day. I would wake up, I would do them, have a tiny bit of food and just keep going. But I loved surfacing the depth and beauty and inspiration inside anyone at all. Especially, man, some of my favorite ones were the ones where people told me that they felt like they had nothing to say. And they were like, why? I don't think I should be a part of this project because I have nothing to say. And I was like, game on, bring it. And those were some of the most beautiful ones. And, uh, so I recorded all of those and again, the focus was on having them. Uh,
Yeah.
Recording them was secondary. It was a side benefit. So
Yeah.
I basically decided like, all right, this is some really cool stuff. And I posted an Instagram story and I said something like, hey, I left it vague. I'm starting this project where I have conversations with strangers. Does anyone want to give me feedback on an episode? Looking for 10 people. And then I think of the like 900 Instagram followers I had at the time, about like 100 people replied, which was insane. Yeah, I think
Wild.
because of how I've connected with people at various events and done random things, people are like, "Oh my goodness, this sounds interesting," and it's also very much
Mm,
me.
yeah.
And so people were curious, and I think about two-thirds of people then told me it was the most meaningful podcast they'd ever listened to or something along those lines. And the feedback was just extraordinary. And I love the
Mm,
fact that random people were touching the lives of other random people. And that perhaps we don't need these gurus and teachers that have all the answers, but that there's power in community and helping each other and wisdom and love and joy and shared experiences there too, right? And so I did a bit of a launch, and for my launch, I was like, instead of is it possible to connect with anybody at all and have a conversation that enriches our lives, instead of just a podcast conversation for an hour or two, I was like, what if I didn't do it one on one, but what if I did it with 10 people and did it over the course of 3 days? And so in between coronavirus waves, I booked an Airbnb. I brought together 10 people that didn't know each other, brought together random people that met at parties, people I followed on Instagram, a girl I used to go on dates with, and then it didn't work out. I hit her up. I was like, hey, come to my like 3 day Airbnb podcast launch thing. And I just wanted to bring together a diverse range of people. And then
yeah.
I created this really unstructured experience where the first day I had them guess what we would be doing. And I had them write all their guesses on a whiteboard. And then I rubbed it out. And I was like, I have
Mm,
absolutely no idea what we're doing. Because I wanted to hold kind of a overarching intention, but give lots of space for what would show up and to surface things
mm,
within people. And people grew as leaders and they grew as videographers and they grew as people that grew out of their shell in all sorts of ways. Uh, and everyone also kind of just interacted with strangers as well, which was hilarious. So, and then eventually that kind of led to van life, but that was the precursor of van life. And no matter what form of living I take for the rest of my life, I think having conversations where I can experience the world of another human being is
yeah.
still one of the most profound things I'll ever do.
Oh man. You know, that sounds so outworldly to the extent that I wonder if that could ever really happen. But the fact that it sounds so surreal, and I'm so fascinated to hear that somebody actually went out and did this. And this, the one thing that really stood out to me was the people who think that they don't have anything to say are the ones that are always surprisingly more meaningful than the others, because I think we all have something to share.
Mm,
And we're made to think that some ideas are worth more than others, but that is so majoritarian and so skewed an outlook of life. And to be able to transcend those boundaries and allow people and empower people to shed those inhibitions is what I'm so intrigued by. The ability to do that. And like you said, it's an art to be able to facilitate that
mm,
in a manner that is not forceful, but empowering. And there's a difference between the two, and I'm sure you understand the difference because you can't compel anybody to do anything. All you can do is create an environment that they feel safe enough in to
mm.
be able to do that, which almost goes to show emphatically that the environment, the world that we live in right now, the societies that we live in right now, don't provide that safe space
Yeah.
to allow for that kind of conversation and for those shared truths to emerge. Could be, and I like to think of it this way. I think more often than not, we know the personalities, but we don't know the person.
Mm.
And getting to know the person and getting to look at the world from that person's outlook and perspective is what can make us a more understanding people and a more loving people.
Yeah, totally, man. Like there's so much in that. So the first thing was I had this kind of unspoken rule that I never told anybody really, but it was that I would never have people on my podcast that asked to be on my podcast. They were like, "Hey, I'm
Mm,
doing this new thing. Like, can I come on your podcast?" And rather for me, the kind of art of the podcast wasn't trying to get these high profile people that everyone else is trying to reach out to.
yeah,
And that wasn't what made it hard. What made it hard to get guests was convincing people that have never done something like this before to do something like this, even when
yeah,
they felt they had nothing to say. And that was
yeah,
the most beautiful thing. And I mean, for me, you were speaking about uh, really having people be seen and heard and felt.
yeah,
And man, I just feel that's so important in the world today, kind of similar to how I was speaking about how at my podcast launch, I had everyone guess what we would be doing and wrote that all on the whiteboard, and then rubbed that all out. I feel like so often there's just kind of this muddled, whatever you want to call it, that's in people's lives where things can get a bit messy and they can forget who they are, and they've been through stuff and things have been intense. And I've found personally, man, that when I truly listen to people, like truly, truly listen, a lot of that stuff will dissolve. And then there'll be this beautiful blank space where I'm like, like this is who the person really is. And then when I get to that point, it's so beautiful to just hold up a mirror and then show them that and be like, yeah, man, like, I think you're just great. Like I can see how much you care and love at a deep level, or whatever that is. And I think the world needs a lot more listening and a lot more people being heard, because there is this like depth and beauty and just beneath the surface, just beneath the surface. But we have to look for it. It's
yeah.
like the stars, right? They're there every night. Some of the time they're covered by clouds, but they're always going to be there. But if you just walk
Mm,
around with your head down, you're not going to see them. You have to make a conscious choice.
yeah. It's always a conscious choice, and it's it's not a tough choice, but we make it seem tough because it's so easy to not make that choice as well. It's an easy choice to make, but it's an easier choice to ignore. And I think every day, more often than not, we choose to ignore making that choice. And the art of listening is something that I personally am so fascinated by, because how do you codify something like that? I try to inculcate that in my life, and I feel like everybody who I talk to about this has a very different response. So I'm curious, how do you think can we inculcate the virtue of listening, truly listening?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that tactics probably aren't the way to go, because
Yeah,
the moment that
exactly.
I'm in a conversation with you and I decide that I want to listen better, then I kind of reach to, okay, here's how I listen better. Maybe I need to like position my body in a certain way where I'm really engaged, or like
Exactly.
whatever. The moment that I go to tactics, I'm thinking and I'm no longer
Yeah,
connecting with you. So tactics in my mind, for that reason, are out.
I
And
agree.
I don't think anyone can just, say they're 17, 18, can just boom, be an amazing listener, because it kind of takes being comfortable with whatever the person says and going on that journey where you can be fully present because you're not
Mm,
resisting anything. You're not trying to drive the conversation in a certain way, right? Like,
yeah.
uh, I mean, there's a lot of Bruce Lee stuff around this in terms of like water just envelops and it fills the space of everywhere it goes. And for me, I need to be really comfortable being in this space where anything can show up, as kind of metaphorical as that may sound, because if I'm not, then I'm not going to be truly here. And the only way for me to be truly here, aside from just being physically present with you, is to be comfortable having this conversation as kind of a blank canvas and to be comfortable with whatever paint ends up on the canvas. And in doing that, then we can have a conversation. And so that's why for me personally, like doing the work, whatever you want to call it, of confronting times when I've had bad experiences in the past and that's filtered the way I've perceived reality, or confronting maybe prejudice to certain groups of people, or whatever it is, because I kind of have to dissolve myself. to be here
Mm.
with you, to really be here with you.
That is such a beautiful notion. Dissolving yourself to be truly present. And that reminds me, I don't know if you've read the book, but I recently read this book called The 40 Rules of Love. And one of the rules in the book was that it's not just enough to be willing to go with the flow, you have to be the flow
Mm.
in order to truly experience life in all its magnanimity and brilliance and be truly present.
Yeah. So basically, there has to be zero distance between you and the flow. And
Yeah.
for me, then, to bring it back to conversations and connection, like what I'm always aiming for is to have the experience of zero
Mm,
distance between me and another human being, which I kind of feel with you right now. Like it doesn't feel for me like there's distance between us.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, Zero distance. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny how that distance is not physical. You think that it's physical distance,
Mm.
especially in these times, we think that being physically distant from each other can impede connection. It undoubtedly does, but I think
Mm.
we discount how much there are emotions involved in this, how much there's so
Yeah.
much more to communication than just merely being physically proximate to each other. And
Yeah.
we tend to discount those for the physical proximity because that's easier for us to measure and see, as is the case with everything in the world around us. We tend to focus on the tangibles because those are low hanging fruit. But being able to do this, I mean, you're sitting in Australia right now. I'm in
Yeah.
Canada. We're literally at
Yeah.
two ends of the world. And
Yeah.
yet, this is probably a more engaging conversation than we could have with a lot of people immediately around us.
Mm.
And I think if we all try and focus on those intangibles, on bringing those distances between us, those emotional distances between us, to as small as we possibly can, we can create those connections.
Yeah. 100%. And then it, for me, basically kind of looks like going on a journey of what does that mean to be able to do that with anyone at all? Because
Yeah.
when I first finished high school and broke out of being shy, and I mean, basically, man, I had a day where I decided I was going to say hi to every single person I walked past on the street.
Wow.
And a lot of people ignore you. Girls think you're hitting on them. People think you're trying to sell something. Like there's all sorts of different reactions.
Yeah.
And yeah, like that day was probably the first moment where I started to fall in love with people and the idea of connecting with them. And then from there, it was a journey of like, okay, great. I can sit next to a stranger on the train and have a meaningful conversation with him and invite him to my birthday party. But can I do the same with my dad that I didn't have a relationship with for 6 years? You know what I mean? Or my stepdad. And like yeah, they're not all going to be easy, and it's
Mm,
a journey.
really the journey. And I think in these situations, it's painfully easy actually to cherry pick and go for, again, the low hanging fruit because it seems to satisfy the condition, but we have to confront, especially the ones that are tougher than the others, that will be uncomfortable, that will be embarrassing,
Mm,
that could possibly be painful as well.
yeah.
But only when we overcome those do we realize that it wasn't as hard as we were anticipating it to be, and B, that you come out of it always a better person, at least in my experience. I've
Mm,
always come out of those better than I was before, and that's how growth happens. That's how learning happens.
mm. And I also find that there's a commonality I see in everyone the more that I've done that. And, I mean, I think it's a Rumi quote where it's basically, we're not a drop in the ocean, right? Like a single separate thing, but the ocean and a drop. We're an individual manifestation of a collective as opposed to some individual on their own.
It's funny you mentioned Rumi because the book that I was just talking about is actually about Rumi and his relationship with the Shams of Tabriz. So clearly we're
Cool.
dabbling in similar pieces of literature, and that's fascinating to see. And that's exactly it, right? We're so much more complex than we think we are. We discount ourselves and our ability to emote, feel, love, care, and do things in general. We are the
Mm,
ocean in a drop rather than a drop in the ocean.
yeah. Yeah, and then it's like, okay, cool. From this place, what does life look like, right? It's like, oh, cool. Well, I now no longer want to be the entrepreneur that I thought I wanted to be 5 years ago because I don't really care about the like nice cars and houses all over the world and having, a ridiculous amount of money that I don't need to live off of. Like for me, I love people and connecting with them and how that leads to crazy experiences like I don't know, going paragliding or learning kite surfing or ending up at random house parties in the middle of nowhere where I know nobody just through people I've met along the way. Like I'm kind of alluding to my van journey here, but
Yeah.
it, for me personally, so much has shifted within me the last few years,
Mhm.
and like life can never be the same, and it's quite confronting because a part of me still wishes that I could just be some conventional entrepreneur that just sold products. Because everyone needs more products, man. We all need more
Yeah.
stuff in our lives, right?
The
That's
consumerist
clearly the
world.
solution. Yeah. And uh but I can't, like I really can't. I love people. I love connecting with people. I love the kind of magical element of it. And yeah, that's really what I want my life to be about. And man, like it's a journey. It's quite the journey.
And I think realizing what you want to do, what you don't want to do, and also making your peace with it and listening to that voice rather than just stifling it
Mm,
is so important. And it's a journey. And speaking of journeys, I feel like the audience has to hear about the
sure.
van escapade across the coast of Australia.
Yeah, man. So it's funny when I started the podcast in the early days, I had this kind of note and I said to myself, one day it'd be really cool to travel around in a van because then I can rock up anywhere and just immerse myself in someone's life, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world. And basically, the week after I launched the podcast, I was, to be frank, just having a really bad time living at home with my family. And there were kind of some unsafe things that started happening just due to everyone getting really stressed. And so I decided I needed to leave home. And I was like, well, shoot, I don't really want to dump a bunch of money I don't have on rent in Sydney, which is a very expensive
Mm.
city to live. What can I do? And I was like, van. And within I think it was within 2 days of seriously deciding that I wanted to buy a van, I literally just
Oh,
bought a van.
wow.
I didn't follow van life pages on Instagram. I didn't watch dozens of YouTube videos. I didn't really know what van life was until I started it. And I got my van and I slept in it the first night and I slept at an angle accidentally. So I woke up at 2 a.m. kind of off the bed and freezing because it was still the middle of winter and I didn't think I needed an extra blanket. Like I learned van life by doing it. And I
Mm.
mean, there's so much I could say about van life, but I think that the original story I want to share is that I was basically planning on just living in my van in Sydney. Like that, I wasn't gonna go travel,
Mm.
halfway around Australia. I was just gonna live in my van in Sydney. In fact, the first mechanic that checked out my $2,000 van said, "Hey man, you shouldn't drive this. You should park it on the road somewhere, never move it, and just live out of it there." But the van got fixed, and then what happened? And then so some context first. The day I left home, I think a friend of mine sent me this Dr. Seuss quote, which was like, "Today's your day. You're off on your way." Whatever, some Dr. Seuss quote. Uh, and so I got the van, ended up getting the van fixed, and ended up driving really well in the end after a few almost mechanical fires and a quarter of the engine working for a couple of days. But I drove it to this beach, and at this beach, I met this couple, and they were like, "Oh, like you have a van. Where are you traveling to?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just got the van. I'm just going to be around Sydney." And they basically told me that the borders to the state or province just north of me had recently been announced that they were going to be reopened. They're
Oh
like,
wow.
maybe you should go there. And so I was like, yeah, wouldn't that be funny if I just left my entire life in Sydney, which I've built over 8 years, left it in a matter of days and drove like, I don't know, it would have been about 40 hours worth of driving north. And I was like, oh man, that'd be cool. And later that day, I drove to my friend's house and I was looking at their bookshelf, and literally the Dr. Seuss book that quote had been from, that the guy had sent me the day I left home, was on that bookshelf. And I was like, this is hilarious. And whether this is something, beyond explanation or not, I'm just going to roll with it. And that day I was like, yeah, I told my friends, I was like, yeah, I saw this Dr. Seuss book. I'm gonna drive to Cairns because of this Dr. Seuss book. And then I kind of left a few days later, and when I got to Cairns and I posted a photo of me arriving, I literally held up this Dr. Seuss book, which was, oh, the places you'll go, and today is your day, you're off on your way, some sort of adventure kind of book. But I loved the philosophy of it. So the whole reason why my van adventure ended up taking shape was because of a chance encounter with a couple that told me some information I didn't know, because of a chance encounter with a mechanic that was actually able to fix the van, and yeah, and because of a Dr. Seuss book.
So many disparate, completely unexpected elements aligning themselves together in a beautiful fashion to make a story. And when you mentioned Dr. Seuss, that just warmed my heart so much because I am such a big comic book fan. Calvin and Hobbes is literally my life. So
Cool.
the fact that this entire journey has been kick-started by a comic book quote is just so fascinating to me. But yeah, that's really the beauty of these things, right? We don't realize even in daily life, so many things align themselves in fashions that are astronomically tough to align, but they do.
Mm,
And the slightest of difference in those alignments can and does change the course of our lives. But we
yes.
discount the just the beauty of the present and how it
Mm.
came about to be because it's just there all the time.
Yeah, I love that. It's the slightest change can change everything. And
Yeah.
for me along the road, I feel like that was something I tried to manipulate for the fun of it, where, I had this van. It has a wooden deck on top that I love sitting
Oh
on top
wow.
of. And I
Uh-huh.
taught myself ukulele on the wooden deck.
Ooh.
People thought I was actually good at it because I would rock up at the beach, sit on top and play
Right.
ukulele. But no, I was
Just not
literally learning
committed.
it. Yeah, learning it in front of a kind of live audience of people, walking the dogs and going for a surf and stuff.
Hmm.
But I love the idea of kind of people going about their day, and then boom, suddenly there's this dude sitting on a van. You can't kind of not see that. Like, he's there, I'm there, right? And
Spectacle.
I love that. I loved kind of just immersing myself in so much randomness and chaos and things being all over the place and people going about their days, and then just slotting myself in there. I think one of the best examples of that is I saw a line of maybe, I would have been at least 50 people lining up to get
Hmm.
into a bar. And there happened to be a public parking lot right by the line.
Hmm.
So I backed my van so that it was literally right by this line of 50 people. And then I started cooking right in front of them for the fun of it. And another van saw what I did, thought it was hilarious. They backed in as well. And one of those guys had a unicycle. And so I said to him, hey, man, you should ride your unicycle on top of my van. So he climbed up onto the wooden deck and he unicycled in front of these 50 people waiting to get into the
Oh
club. And I was like,
man.
man, we're all having so much more fun than you. Uh, so I love, and then I became good friends with them, of course, and had all sorts of magical experiences. And yeah, I mean, they were kind of the first people that really taught me what van life was, because I, I had no idea. I was just kind of doing it. So yeah, using like Some days I would wear a Hello Stranger shirt, and then people would respond to that. Other days I might just be longboarding around, and some days I might pull my speaker out and play some music while I was doing that. I think having a rough intention, but then just submersing myself in reality and trying to see how I could kind of collide with people and kind of be in their way, not in a like aggressive way, just in a, oh, like, I wasn't there, but now I am.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I have to say, I would pay more money to watch somebody unicycle on top of a van than go to a bar. You should have started selling tickets or something. That could have been your way of
I should have.
sustenance.
I
The
could have.
next time,
Next
meet
time.
somebody. Next time.
Dude, one of the things I would love to do is have a convoy of vehicles with a bunch of friends. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like three or four
yeah, like an
vehicles, maybe a big
entourage.
bus. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have some
Uh,
different instruments people play, go out. For some reason, throughout my whole life, I've had a big fascination of doing things with strangers. I think
mm,
because of the random aspect and not kind of knowing where it will go. So I've thrown dinner parties for strangers. I did a project with my great friend Steven in Montreal, Canada, where we found
mm,
10 strangers that had a social impact dream they were passionate about just by holding signs up on the streets of Montreal. And then we helped them all take a step towards achieving them. We had a girl that was really passionate about songwriting and wanted to use her voice to create good in the world and literally went to study a degree. I forget what it was. I think it might have been about the environment or something, just so that she could have power in her words to create impact. We met her,
mm.
and a year after meeting her, she messaged. This actually was around the time my podcast launched. She messaged us saying, "Hey, by the way, I just released my first single, and I don't think I would have done it without you guys." That was like a year later. So I love interacting with strangers, and I think it would be a lot of fun to have a convoy of vehicles, to throw some dinner parties with random people, to get some musical instruments going and tour around, and not necessarily to just give people money and handouts. Like I know there are people that do that. I've got nothing against that, but
Mm,
more from a place of bringing this like joy and lightness, and then
mm.
having people feel seen and heard. Those would be the kind of two intentions.
I would pay to see that. Maybe that, I mean, now that I've heard of the possibility, it would be disappointed to not see this materialize. So I'm counting on you, Andy.
I'm pretty confident. The only thing I'm unsure of is like how I would approach something like that from a content perspective, because
Mm,
the last thing I want is people just becoming addicted to instant gratification because they see
yeah,
unicycles on top of a van instead of going out themselves and saying hi to someone or reconnecting with their mother or whatever it is,
yeah,
which would be a lot more fulfilling than just the content. But then the
yeah,
content can also inspire, and so I feel very
yeah.
mixed about content. But yeah, I think I'll definitely do that, man. Like I literally I kind of drew it up at one point as well. It was like if I had this massive van and then it would have this massive slide out table at the back, and then it would have like a glass roof. That way people could sit on top and play musical instruments, but you could see them. And yeah, dude, I like the idea of a convoy because I've already done convoys. Like I met other people in vans while I went up the
Mm,
coast, and I kind of got to know all the cool places. And I was like, hey, tag along for a
yeah.
couple of days. And these convoys kind of just end up emerging, and then you travel with
Mm,
people for a period of time. And I'm very curious what would be possible with an intentional kind of convoy. Not really a circus, but I mean, I guess borderline in some ways. I think I,
uh,
I love entering with the kind of fun and joy and playful side to really help people connect with that within themselves. Like I don't think
mm,
we have enough play in the world today. And then do that
yeah,
for a bit and then go deep. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
go super deep and have people be seen and heard and then express something deep within them that may have been hidden to them, and then see what can be created from there. Like one of my ideas with the podcast moving forward, because man, like the question I was asking myself every episode was, is it possible to connect with anybody at all and have a conversation that enriches our lives?
Yeah.
And is there depth and beauty and inspiration inside everyone at all? And by the time I got to kind of the 20th episode, I was like, yeah, like the answer to both of those questions is 100% yes. So I was like, okay, where to from here? And the idea that I had was I don't want the conversation to be the end point, but the
Yeah.
starting point. And I want to connect with someone, have a conversation, but then create some project with them. And maybe we
Yeah.
surface that they're really passionate about music and that's something they've never done before. It's like, great. How about they hang out with me in my van for a couple of days and we'll go through a mini concert on the roof of my van. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And
Yeah.
turn the conversations from the form of art they are in and of themselves to actually the ability to create something wider in the world.
Mm.
So I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious about that and how that could kind of maybe link to the Congo ideas, to the massive convoy idea. And yeah, man, like I really want to dedicate my life to this kind of thing, while at the same time using, like, I feel like the skills of entrepreneurship and business, as much as a part of me just wants to abandon them completely, are still
Mm.
relevant for creating any vision in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. So much to unpack there. Wow.
Yeah.
uh,
I
but
know. Yeah,
that's the
pick your
beauty
angle.
of these, right? That's the
Yeah.
beauty of these. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind to me when I hear all of that is that we need more play, and this notion that play and creating something of meaning have to be different, have to be separate and existing independently of each other. It's something that I don't understand, because if we can't find joy in the work that we do, then A, will we ever truly give it our best? And B,
Mm,
will it ever bring the best out of us?
yeah.
And I don't think that is, I don't believe in that. I think that the work that we have to do has to be centered in joy. There has to be learning, has to be fun. Work has to bring about joy. And when you try and use joy and fun and play as a way to make people comfortable again,
Mm,
that's how those inhibitions get shed. That's how
yeah.
people are able to engage without worry of feeling stupid or
Mhm.
inadequate.
Yeah.
And just the ability to materialize that, I think, is fascinating. And, you know, call it a circus if you will, but if it pays the bills, it pays the bills.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, I think a lot of the time, if I lead with, like, who are you deep down when we remove everything else, it's too jarring and confronting. But if there's an
Yeah,
environment of fun and play and trust built, right? And then we can go deep, and then we go deep, and then there's something there. And then we get back to play again and meaning and joy. And then we can go out and create, more fun
yeah,
stuff. And then it's like, okay, and then let's go. It's both at the same time. I think
yeah.
two words that I definitely want to dedicate my life to are joy and meaning. And
Mm,
my travels in the van and my podcast have been, I mean, really just the yeah, I've had so much joy and so much meaning at the same time
mm,
that it's been so beautiful.
yeah. Joy and meaning, those, at the end of the day, those are the two things that we all seek for, even if we don't agree with it, even if we don't explicitly accept that, we all crave that at the very least. Some more than others, and some more explicitly than others.
Mhm.
And being able to use this art of conversation, being present to create something more, is also
Yeah,
something that I'm fascinated by, because we all have it within us. It's all
yeah,
there, but being able to tap into it and harness it is a special thing. And also, often asking these questions, as you said, just these vague, open-ended, overarching questions, can be jarring. And it's not like we don't have the answers, but those answers flow more naturally when we just allow the people to be themselves. So it's almost like, I don't want you to tell me, I want you to show me. And when you're able to create that
mhm,
environment, people show you rather than telling you. And I think that is a lot more convincing. and it's a lot more authentic an answer,
Mm,
a lot more truthful an answer. As you were talking about before, those truths emerge because we let people be in that environment rather than just evoke an answer that might sound intelligible, that might sound
mm.
profound.
Yeah, exactly. That's why look, I mean, I think there's environments where interviews are really useful. Like if you want to learn about
Yeah,
marketing or you want to learn about finance or crypto or
yeah,
entrepreneurship, right? In that case, it's really useful to hear from people that have had success and learn about tactics and skills.
yeah,
But in a lot of other cases, I think interviews are way overrated. I would much
yeah,
rather have conversations and not treat the other person as an object that I need to get things from and get the best things. I would rather have the conversation as an end in and of itself,
yeah.
connect with the person purely for the sake of connecting with them, and then see what emerges. And every single time I've done that, the conversation has been just so magical and so beautiful. And it lights me up in a way that nothing else does.
And I think both parties know when there is the difference. There's, even though we might act like there isn't a difference in the way we behave in these environments, there
Mm,
clearly is. And when the other party senses that that is the case, I think they change the way that they behave and engage with you as well. You know, in university, trying, and even in the real life, trying to get jobs, trying to find employment, this whole notion of networking is talked about so much. And I personally always had a pet peeve with the term networking because the moment it becomes transactional, that's when you fail to actually connect and learn from the person. When you engage with people solely for the purpose of learning, and I think that's what this comes down to,
mm.
an unquenchable thirst for listening and learning in a passionately curious manner that is not just going around and picking boxes
Yeah.
of a checklist, uh, is what makes the difference. And we all know when we're doing which and when the other party that we're interacting with is doing which.
Yeah, I don't like networking, man. I don't like transactions. Like there's definitely a role for both of them, but overall from a way that I personally like to live my life. Yeah, I think the world needs more of the human side rather than the manufactured machine-like side,
Yeah,
especially nowadays.
yes, exactly. And it's a supply and demand situation, right? Only because we feel like there is a need for it do we act in that manner and people respond to it in that manner. And the only way to break that cycle is to be the person who breaks that cycle rather than
Mm,
expect somebody else to do it because nobody will.
yes. Yeah, you have to be comfortable being the first and shaking
Yeah.
people up. Dude, I would go to uh networking events, no networking events, right? And I love to jar people and play around
Yeah.
with them, kind of like the whole
Uh-huh.
play and then go deep. So I had
Yeah.
this go-to question for a couple of years. Uh and the first thing I would ask people, I was like, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you a question?" They're like, "Yeah, sure." I was like, "How long do you reckon you'll live for?" And then people were like, "What?" And got them to guess, and then they would maybe say, okay, 70, 80, 90, it's like whatever, okay. And I said, hypothetically, let's imagine that life on earth like continues into the future indefinitely, and let's say that your life is, so you have another, what, you're 30 now, you're going to live to 80, that's another 50 years, so your 50 years is this long. And then I'll kind of grab a table or an object and then kind of put my hand way down and say, all right, well, let's assume that this distance over here is 1,000 years from now. And I say, if the world 1,000 years from now was a blank canvas and your life was the paint on the canvas, if you could have the world look any way at all 1,000 years from now because of how you lived your life, what would that be? And then people give an answer, and that's the whole depth thing. And
Mm,
yeah, man, I loved going to networking events and asking people questions like that because it's totally different. It's totally different from, I want to build a company and make a bunch of money. And like, man, like I'm just so not interested in, quote unquote success. Like, it just doesn't really interest me too much anymore.
yeah. Oh man, I'm gonna use that question from now. I'm borrowing that from you, and
Yeah.
I'll get back to you to see if I get any interesting responses. But the whole notion of success, what is success? How do you measure success? And can there ever be, I think a lot of the way we structure our lives and act in the world around us is to this compartmentalized textbook definition of success, which in my opinion is very skewed. How do you go about making your peace with the fact that your idea of success is very
Mhm.
different from anybody else's?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is that there's definitely still a part of me that, just wants to be that guy that uh makes a bunch of money and drives a bunch of nice cars and, goes out and parties and sleeps with a bunch of people and,
Mm,
maybe does a bunch of drugs or drinks. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a
yeah,
massive part of me, but that part of me is still there. And I think it will be to some degree for the rest of my life. And that's okay. Um, but I'm just, I think what I've seen is when I surrender and when I tap into deep within me and lead
yeah,
from my heart and follow my heart, especially when it doesn't make a logical sense,
yeah,
I've seen how beautiful and magical and fulfilling life can get. And in having experienced that, there's no going back. You know what I mean? Like I, I wrote this letter, kind of to my friend, kind of to myself a couple of weeks ago, just summing up where I feel I'm at the moment. And
mm,
I basically said that my journey the last few years has felt metaphorically like an astronaut that's gone to the moon for the first time, or gone to outer space for the first time. And before I was just uh this citizen of Earth, and now I've gone to the moon. And I say that because it kind of, like, the moon's obviously very different to Earth, and where I
yeah,
felt I went was a very kind of different dimension, not in like a weird quantum spiritual woo-woo kind of sense, but in a,
mm,
my values were so different, my experiences were
yeah,
so different, what I cared about was so different, right? And uh, just as an astronaut can't, go to outer space and then live the rest of his life denying he went to space, he's going to tell his friends about it. It's going to influence the way he lives his life. Like, he went to the moon, he saw the Earth from a distance. For me, there's no going back.
yeah,
I can't simply deny the experience that I've had, because
yeah,
there's been, look, I mean, there's been a lot of pain too, but there's been so much joy and so much magic, and I've lived with so much awe and wonder. And the thought of just forgetting about that to become successful and have the car and the house and the girl and the job and the first, you know what I mean? Like, oh,
yeah,
to turn left when I enter the plane, to enter first class instead of economy. Like, oh, like, dude, if that happens for me, you know, and I end up having money to be able to do things like that, like, great. Like, I'm not anti money, but that's so not the goal. That's so
yeah,
not the goal. I I I just want to connect with people, and I want to make magic happen, and I want to keep surrendering and trusting myself at the deep level, and listening to the voice within me that doesn't always use words, and then bringing that kind of more masculine energy of like, all right, well, I'm just going to commit and make it happen in the world.
yeah,
And that's kind of just what I want to do with my life. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't want what so many people around me want. Uh
yeah,
which is confronting, but it's just not me. And I do slip into it, and I'll be like, all right, I just want this. And then I kind of try to go after it, and I'm like, oh man, like, this isn't fulfilling. And normally after a day or two, I'm back here, having a
yeah,
conversation with someone like you. And I mean, like, dude, there's nowhere in the world I would rather be right now. Like, I don't care if I was on a beach in, I don't know, Mexico, or, whatever, flying a plane, like sitting in first class. Like, I would rather be having this conversation with you than driving a Ferrari, or like whatever it might be. It's just that, and genuinely, like, I mean this from the depths of my being.
mm,
Like, there's nowhere I'd rather be rather than chatting with you right now. And in having discovered that, it's changed absolutely everything. And now it's just a matter of, how do I live from this place, and how do I do it in a sustainable way? And, like, that's it for the rest of my life. That's what I'll do.
once you get a taste of it, you can't go back. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. First of all, I'm honored and privileged that you'd rather be here than be on a first class flight to a beach in Mexico.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm worth all that, but that's very kind of you. This notion of going back, the one thing that I've been wrestling with myself
Hmm.
for the longest time now is,
Sure.
especially in this pandemic, we keep talking about going back to normal. But one thing that I'm always so intrigued by is, what is going back to normal? What about the world that we lived in before was normal? And B, going back, as you said, discredits the lived experiences of the present. And I think we have an opportunity to rebuild and decide for ourselves what exactly about the world before we want to retain. Sure, we all want to get back and be able to meet in person and do all those things, but just defaulting to the status quo is the easy thing to do. But taking the responsibility to reflexively think about everything that we've learned in these times, and there's so much
Yeah.
learning, there's so much
Yeah.
pain, there's so much joy, and there's so much learning in being able to harness and tap into that learning to build a world that is better than what it was before, is what I
Hmm.
think we have an opportunity to do right now. But it almost scares me to think how tempted we are to just revert back to what we were before, rather than hope for something more.
Yeah, man. Like it's still so easy for me to be like, all right, I'm just gonna sleep in till 12 today and watch Netflix. You
Yeah,
know? It's so easy for me to be like, I don't feel like having a conversation with someone all the time, but then I do, and then it's
yeah,
magical. And yeah, it's so easy to slide back. But again, having experienced what's possible and having, metaphorically gone to the moon, having experienced something else, having tasted a new food that's suddenly become my favorite food. Like there's no going back. Like if you decide you really love avocados, you know, and then someone's like, "Hey, man, just give up avocados and have strawberries. You used to like
yeah,
strawberries. You're not gonna like strawberries. You're gonna go out of your way to find avocados."
yeah, yeah.
You know?
Speaking of
Yeah.
avocados, it's funny that you mentioned that.
Oh, no way. Avocado AirPod case. There you go. Well, I chose a perfect, perfect comparison.
This is how in sync we are.
Of course.
Oh man. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious. It's so easy to fall into that inertia, but how do you bring yourself to commit to living the life that you have the taste of living? How do you bring yourself to, it's almost a discipline, right? It's almost a self-discipline to not go back to the easy
Mhm.
cost.
Yeah, man. Like that's okay. So two things. One, I don't know if it's a Buddhist saying or where it's from, but it talks about like life's an ongoing journey of cleaning our window
Mm,
and letting the light in, right? And we have to clean our window to let the light in, and that light's always there, but we need to go on the journey of kind of healing and working through stuff that's happened in the past and giving space to
mm,
feel our emotions and all that kind of thing. So there's totally that, and I've definitely done a fair bit of that, and I definitely have a infinitely long journey to go there, or almost infinitely. And but the other thing for me on a practical level that I've really just distinguished in these last few weeks is having conversations like this, like
mm,
setting up a time at least once a week, absolute minimum once a fortnight, where I'm doing something like this. I'm recording an episode of my podcast, or I'm having a chat with someone amazing like you, because I find personally that conversations in this format really bring me back in a
mm,
powerful way to who I am. I had a really great week this week, and I think a lot of it was because of the beautiful conversation I had with my friend Monica, last Sunday, I believe it was. So, yeah, conversations And then to add a third thing, slowing down in space. I mean, there's this quote, I think something along the lines of most of man's problems today are because he can't sit alone in a room by himself for 10 or 20 minutes, whatever it is. And for me, giving space, like not going on social media all the time, taking the time to breathe. Dude, my latest thing has been surfing. Like I got into surfing and I love it, man. I also meet really
So
fun and
cool.
old wise people in the water that kind of teach me about surfing, but then kind of about
Uh-huh.
life as well. And yeah, and just getting out in nature. So yeah, I would say doing the work to clean your window, because it's not like you're instantly going to be able to connect with the deepest aspects of who you are, right? This kind of,
Yeah,
they might be sheltered and hidden, at least to start off with. So doing that, having conversations, and this is
yeah,
for someone else, it might be something completely different. Maybe it's playing the
yeah,
guitar, right? But for me, it's things like this: conversation and space.
yeah, yeah. I think there's just so much noise around us, and it's we immerse ourselves in that noise because we're too afraid of silence. And one thing that I've had so many conversations with a really close friend of mine recently is being able to appreciate the value of silences, as awkward and uncomfortable as they might be. And we actually ended up coming to this conclusion that if you're able to be comfortable in silence with somebody, complete silence, that's when you know that you're truly comfortable with them.
Mm,
Because when you're not comfortable, then you fill it with noise. But being comfortable and feeling empowered in that space, empty space,
yeah,
silent space, is the true mark of comfort.
yeah, 100%.
Mm.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I made everyone that came along to my podcast launch look into the eyes of someone else for a couple of minutes. I think it was 3 or 4 minutes without
Mm.
talking, and then I rotated and had everyone do that to connect. Yeah, it's such a powerful exercise. I tried making everyone in my university dorm do that as well. At like it was a coffee house night where everyone's
Uh-huh.
doing poetry or music, and I did a poem for the first one. But for the second one, I made everyone line up in
Uh-huh.
2 lines and match them up with random people. And then I
Oh
made them look
man.
at them in the eyes for 2 minutes without talking, which was hilarious.
That's weird. You know, it's funny. I did a spoken word poetry camp one time, and they made me do the same thing. So maybe it's just a
Mm.
poetry thing.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's called eye gazing, really, at least from
Mm,
what I've heard of it, right? It's such a powerful
yeah.
practice. Yeah.
Such, just again, it's all about just being comfortable when everything around you comes to a grinding halt,
Yeah.
and there's nothing you can distract yourself from to take your focus away, literally, from what's right in front of you, and
Yeah.
just choosing to
Yeah.
ignore it.
Dissolving yourself into nothing so you can kind of immerse and absorb everything.
Dissolving
Yeah.
yourself into.
Yeah, into nothing so you can kind of immerse and absorb everything, right? Becoming the cup that other people
Yeah.
fill with their words and their heart. Like,
Oh
yeah.
man. This episode is going to have so many quotes. And I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. Well, I sincerely hope that all of us aspire to become that cup, because only when we try and become that cup can we encourage people to pour themselves into that cup and then
Mm,
therefore become a cup for somebody else. And that's just how
yeah.
these things work.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a funny metaphor, but it is
Yeah, I know. I
frighteningly
mean, I think
true.
it's so relevant, and
Mm,
yeah, I mean, but again, the moment that I tell myself like I need to become this space where anything can be said, and I go back to tactics, right, and I lose it.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
a good kind of final Bruce Lee thing. I think it was a Bruce Lee that said this. Someone told me it was him. Is my work is a finger pointing to the moon. Don't confuse
Mm.
the finger for the moon, right? The cup
Oh,
analogy, the idea of
nice.
dissolving, the idea of how we listen, the idea of bringing that joy and fun and then using that as an access to go deep, the question about the
Yeah,
world in 1,000 years, right? For me, that's all fingers pointing to the moon. And
yeah.
don't confuse the finger for the moon. Like, use that, but realize that's not the bit. It's actually
Yeah.
pointing somewhere, and experience and discover and share with other people where that's pointing to.
Yeah. And the only way to do that is to actually do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I hope that in all of our lives, we try and do this. We try and experience the moon, so to say, for ourselves. And I know that it's a lot easier for all of us because of fingers pointing towards the moon in the form of people like you and the work that you do.
Mm.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Andy. And I sincerely hope that that convoy idea comes to life, because I'm looking forward to that. I'll be waiting. And secondly, that we all appreciate the true beauty of the moon that is up in the sky all the time, every night, but we just choose to keep our head down. And I hope that someday we get to the moon once in a while.
Wow. Beautiful. I thought it's so much, such a joy speaking to you. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. And yeah, man, I'm looking forward to what we'll both create with our lives as we live from joy and meaning.
Well, likewise, sir. Likewise. Well, that's it for this episode of Different Boat, Same Storm. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back soon with a different guest in a different boat, but in the same storm. See you around.